listen, never in my life associated the word boring with baseball.
We know what's up.
Me? Yeah. Famous? Yeah.
And I'm like giddy over there smiling like, we're about to win this shit.
Did everyone give you crap? Give me a good host story.
I'm not picking it up.
We both love the game.
We talk about it every day.
Can't get enough baseball.
Having some popcorn, you're fooling around your phone.
I'd have to wait in line for 3 hours.
Hang on, because it's about to be a wild ride.
Guess what? There's no human being I'd rather be talking to right now than Craig Breslow.
Well, I appreciate that.
All right, well, see, there's all kinds of different reactions. I appreciate your appreciation. So the trade deadline, you've gone through it. We've talked a lot about it. I'm sorry, I will not ask you about making June trades anymore.
I realize that that window is passed.
How come you aren't making any June trades for next year?
Okay, right.
So now that we reflect on it, was there any besides obviously the big one, the June, was there any action in June? Did it
usually
July 1st, like you said, July 1st it turned.
Right.
When you woke up July 1st, did it turn?
I thought of you when I woke up.
As did everybody else.
Also, rare to have a question posed as besides the really big one, was there anything else that happened? Usually it goes besides these small things that.
That's what they said about Steve Pierce in 2018.
Right.
But did that first week of July? Did you notice a difference?
Yeah, I think that's when teams start to reach out. We start to reach out and try to get a sense for plans, knowing that there's usually a little bit of a lapse in communication around the draft. So try to make contact with the other teams, understand how they're approaching the deadline, knowing that there'll be a week or so where communication usually goes pretty quiet, and then coming out of the draft, things will pick up in earnest.
How much the draft? We don't really ask you a lot about this. I remember you used to ask all the time. I remember Theo going out to watch players. Have you been going out to watch players at all? Or?
I haven't watched many players in person, and that was
a different time, or
it was very intentional because I feel like unless I can commit to watching almost the entire player population, then it's going to be kind of random, and it's going to turn out, if I see a guy and I saw them on a great day, I'm kind of cherry picking that experience. If I see them on a bad day, probably going to over-index for the one viewing that I saw. And I know that there are others who approach this differently in my position and go out and see a ton of players. But to me, it's kind of like you should see a ton or you should see none. Otherwise, you risk just introducing bias to the process.
It makes sense to me. I'm not just saying that. I mean, but because that's all I've known is this time of year, guys have gone out. But I also the bad day, the good day, the one guy, the two guys, and then another part of it is, Craig Breslow was watching this guy, and then
and I think you just risk, I see one guy, he has a great day, I speak up in the draft room, and now all of a sudden that ends up being the guy that we take, and it was kind of arbitrary that I happened to see that guy and not 25 others, and I think we have a really good scouting department in place that's done a really good job with the draft for a long time, and trust Devin to run the draft. And I'll ask questions where appropriate, and try to help inform our kind of high-level draft strategy. But we have to trust the scouts, trust the process, and like I said, I think the evidence is in the track record.
How does that work?
Drafts.
You're in the room. Obviously, Devin is this is his thing.
Mm-hmm.
But then it becomes where the rubber meets the road time. Okay, maybe Devin says, I want to pick this guy. Do you just say, okay, let's pick him? I mean, in other words, do you sort of let him have the ultimate say, or do you have the ultimate say? I don't know how that works.
Yeah, I think we try to make decisions collectively. I suppose if at the end of the day I was very uncomfortable with a selection that we were going to make, I could put my thumb on the scale, but I'm hesitant to do that. I think instead I'll ask questions about the process, and to ensure that we've collected as much information as we can. To make sure that we're not going to find something out after we make the draft selection. We talk about the alternatives that might exist at that pick. I think that's where I can be more useful than saying, I I don't think that this guy has a 55 hit tool. I think he's got a 50 hit tool, right? Like that.
Was there a guy in last year's draft where his name came up and you were familiar with him, and it said, oh yeah, and you sort of were in the back of your mind, like I like that guy. I know obviously Braden is like top, but sometimes maybe there's a second or third or fourth rounder.
Yeah, I try to get as familiar as possible with the entire player pool.
Yeah.
And so I feel like I don't want to be caught off guard where we're talking about a handful of players that are going to be available at our pick and I'm not familiar with them.
Yeah.
But obviously last year we skewed pretty heavily toward pitching. A lot of that was intentional and kind of worked through prior to getting to the draft. But there were a bunch of players that we all would have been very comfortable with.
Or maybe there was a guy like you like you say, you try to familiarize yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, like I didn't know about him, and they're like, oh no, this guy's really good.
We spend enough time talking through all the players.
I'm sorry, these are
advance.
stupid questions, but I don't know how it works.
Yeah, no, we spend days and days and days talking through the players, and we've got a pretty good idea of what players we'll be deciding about at each of our picks.
Which player fell last year that you didn't think might fall to you?
There's. I don't think I could point to a single player. I think you generally will say hey, these 5 guys are likely to go in the top 5 picks. Exactly what the order is, we don't really know. And then probably by pick 10, these are the group of players that are going to be gone. And so, I think you kind of deal with it in pockets as opposed to I think this guy's going to go 1-1 and then this guy's going to go next, right? It's more like you zoom out and you say, yeah, that's basically how we thought the first 10 or 15 picks were going to go. I think what differs maybe year to year is where that threshold is, where you'd say, hey, these are the clear top 5 guys or the clear top 8 guys. And I think there's a little bit more uncertainty maybe in this year's draft, so we'll see how it plays out.
It was funny you said that. I was talking to Scott Hatterberg about the draft a couple years ago when they drafted Jacob Wilson. That top 5, everyone knew the top 5, and they had fell out of it. They should have gotten the number 1 pick, but they didn't. So they're left at 6, and they're sort of what do we do? It worked out for them anyway.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So. And usually that's the way, at least in my experiences, that's the way it's gone, where you would say, hey, this is the consensus top 4, top 5, top 6. And usually it kind of falls that way. Teams are largely playing off the same deck at this point.
Yeah.
They're collecting the same information. They're using similar models, getting similar scouting reports. So.
Then the draft is weird. Like I said, I don't think a lot of people in the world, in baseball world, is thrilled that the draft is in the middle of the trade deadline. Just how it is. You got enough to do. So you look back at last year, and I know you probably have been asked this question, but when you go through last year and you look at what happened, what you did, the process of it, what is there anything you can take away from learning? For instance, I'll give you for instance. You can tell me if I'm full of hooey. All right, so I look at, you go into the Dodgers series, Dodgers and Rockies, right? You know that your relievers you're going to be thin. No Slayton, no Martin, and then no Kenley. Is there an inclination that we got to act now because we got to cover ourselves? And do you look back at that and say, hey, maybe we should have? I mean, again, maybe I'm completely wrong, but
it's tough because there's so much volatility in reliever performance, so you never really know, we might be thin tonight, but this also might be the night that a Greg Weissert or Josh Winkowski or somebody steps up, right, and fills a really valuable role. Zach Kelly had pitched really, really well, and then he didn't pitch well. There's a handful of relievers that maintain really high performance through the course of the season. They're incredibly valuable, and then there's a ton of volatility in the rest of us, I would say, to where there are stretches, and we've seen it here, right? Stretches where you're wow, that guy is pitching great out of the pen, and then maybe they struggle a little bit, maybe they get overworked a little bit, and somebody else needs to step up. But I think if you asked a little bit about what takeaways, what lessons I've kind of learned from last year's deadline, and I would say there are a few things. The most important is the deadline is going to be evaluated by the performance of the guys from the time you get them on, and it doesn't matter what they did beforehand. It doesn't matter how great a decision you made
great
or what.
grades, by the way, on August 1st. You
right?
did.
Yeah. I think that's one thing. I think the other is it's really easy to spend a ton of time on ideas and proposals and concepts that never reach the finish line. And so, I think we need to be creative and we need to think a little bit outside the box. We also can't get so bogged down in chasing these pie-in-the-sky ideas that we lose like the practical approach that's in front of us.
It's so, like we said, in the offseason, you used the word intentional, I think. There's an element of that where, like you said, you want to cast a wide net, but you also probably want to identify these are the guys that we think can really, really help us. You don't want to overpay for them if you don't have to.
Right.
But, is there at that element of maybe that's a lesson, I don't know, like say, hey, listen, we want to go after these guys really hard. If we don't get them, we don't get them, but at least we went after them.
Yeah, and I think there's an element of trying to understand how willing a team might be to trade them, right? Because there are a lot of players that we would love to go after, but if we spend 3, 4, 5 days trying to engage, only to find out that a team was going to hold on to the player all along, then that's 3 or 4 days that we didn't spend on another idea.
When with the not the surplus, the surplus with the roster construction, is it also? Do you want to wait before you do anything? More so now because you don't want to say. I think we talked about this before. You don't want to just trade someone and then have a problem the next day. You don't want to have Veritek breaking his elbow on deck circle or something like that. Is that definitely a thought process here? Because yes, it seems like you have a lot of players for maybe one less position, but it's maybe you want to wait a little bit deeper into the month because of that.
Well, I think there's that, but I also think really good teams have 8 really good position players on the field and also really good position players on the bench, and so obviously people are thinking and talking about how we have more guys capable of playing every day than positions we have for them. But to me, that's an opportunity to have a weapon that can come off the bench. It's an opportunity to keep guys fresh and rotate through and make sure that we're putting the best lineup out there every single night. There's this fine line between having a logjam and having depth. And on any given night, it could kind of be either of those things. And so we're not in a position where we have to make a trade, because I think everybody understands what we're trying to accomplish. Everybody's bought in, and Alex does a really good job of managing the roster. Yes.
Right? I mean, because sometimes you say, hey, listen, we're cool with depth, but if you don't have everyone buying into it, you've been on teams probably like that, right?
Yeah, and I've been on both sides of it, right? I've been on the side of, guys on the bench kind of being disgruntled and frustrated and not putting the team first, and then I've been on successful teams who have said, hey, this is the way that I can contribute to winning games, and I'm completely invested and all in on that.
Yeah. You had made mention, I think, on the radio about if it was right now, starting pitching would be a priority, right? I mean, that would probably be the top of the list. We've talked about this before. I think that the hope is that when you get to the deadline, you don't have to make a trade, but that's almost never happens. Why is starting for you, where starting pitching is it when you talk about starting pitching, ideally, would it be the level of someone who could pitch in a postseason game?
Yeah, I think so. First of all, running out of pitching can be so destabilizing, right? There's this residual effect on the rest of the staff, on the bullpen. And then also, we feel really good about the starting pitching that we have. And, obviously Garrett's pitched like an ace all season long. And, over the last month or so, Gio's been dominant. And Bayo, actually, if you go back to last All-Star break, has been a really good pitcher. And Buehler's last 2 out, we know we're starting to see what he's capable of doing. And whether it's Fitz or Dobbins or Houck getting healthy or Harrison who's working on some things in AAA, we're not just looking for bodies that we can call starting pitchers, right? If we're going to bring somebody in, they need to really move the needle for us. And so that's, I think where we'll have our sights set. But it's really hard to find
impact
starting pitching.
Is it the hardest, you think?
Yeah.
I mean, that's a lesson you learned, right?
For sure.
Yeah.
And that's why we've worked so hard to build up the depth because it means at any given time for a stretch, you get a chance to get Gio in dominant form and Bayo as this consistent arm and Walker rounding into form, right? Like the more opportunities you have for somebody to step up, the more likely you are to get there.
The last thing, and you've been very generous for your time, thank you. But is it as simple as, like, I look at it and I'm like, okay, you get a pitcher. It's a guy who can pitch in the postseason. Like I mentioned that, right? But it's really like that's the thought process. Like you said not to get a pitcher just for a pitcher, but in a very simplistic way of looking at it, a guy that we think if we got into a postseason run, that he would be in the rotation.
Yeah, like I said, just because we spent so much time building up the depth that we have here, and we've seen what the Fitz and Dobbins and those guys are capable of doing, and Harrison obviously was a big target for us. So yeah, fortunately we're not in a position where we say, hey, we just need starting pitching depth, because we believe we have that. We feel really good about it. If there's somebody who really moves the needle and changes, kind of the way that teams would kind of advance against us, then that's something that we have to be open to.
Thank you, appreciate it.
You got it.